Family abandoned me because sister blames me for her divorce. Years later, I get an email out of nowhere explaining me everything with proof, so I ruined her life with it. My family disowned me and threw me out of the house almost 7 years ago. I, 29M, was only 22 then and had no financial stability to afford a place of my own, and I was completely unprepared for this sudden turn of events, both emotionally and financially. The cause of all this was my sister Hannah, 37F, and I never had a close bond because of the big age difference between us. She married her boyfriend Pete, 39M, when she was 27, after dating him for 3 years, and they stayed married for 3 years. They divorced 3 years into their marriage because Hannah claimed that Pete was having an affair with one of my friends. I had been staying with my parents after college since I had just started working, and I wanted to save some money before I moved out. My parents were fine with that situation as well, but that changed when my sister declared her divorce. She just came home one day in tears and said that she had filed for divorce because her husband had been cheating on her for 6 months. And then she blamed me for introducing my friend to him. My friend Emily, 28F, was trying to put on some weight, and since Pete was a qualified dietitian, he agreed to help her out. I was the one who introduced her to him, and apparently she was the one Pete had been cheating on my sister with. I was stunned that this was happening, because even though Emily and I were not close, I knew for sure that she was a good person and would never get involved with a married man. Besides, cheating was so unlike Pete as well. He was totally in love with Hannah and always had nice things to say about her, so I found it very hard to believe that he cheated on her. I had my suspicions, but my parents trusted her right away and did not even ask anything, despite the fact that she had no evidence of him cheating. They just accepted her word for it. But I'm not going to blame them since they would pick their own daughter over their son-in-law, no matter who was right. What I did not understand was why they kicked me out just because Hannah said so. She just barged in one day, threw a fit, and somehow persuaded my parents to throw me out just because I had been the one to introduce Emily to Pete. She accused me of destroying her marriage, and my parents agreed with her for some reason. I was heartbroken and tried to stop my parents, but they did not want to hear me out at all and told me that if I did not leave, then they would kick me out by force. In just one day, I had lost my family and my home and had no clue where to go. I was literally crying on the sidewalk with all my stuff for an hour or so before I managed to pull myself together and went to a friend's house for the night. I tried to contact them every single day for the next few days, but had no success. My friend was nice enough to let me stay at his place until I was able to find an apartment for myself. Unfortunately, my parents had pretty much decided that I was wrong here, and I was the one to blame for the divorce. My mom and dad had actually told me that they were appalled by what I had done before throwing me out, which did not even make sense because it was not like I had been the one who Pete cheated with. They had blocked my number so I could not reach them at all, and when I tried to visit them, my mom threatened to call the police on me if I did not leave. So after that, I finally understood that they were serious about this and actually did hold me responsible for whatever had happened. I don't think I had any reason to be shocked, since my sister always had been the preferred child. My parents had never really wanted a second child, so I always got ignored. And while I did not mind much for it growing up, I did not know that it would lead to something so huge. Looking back, I suppose I should have expected it, but honestly, I don't think anyone in my situation could have anticipated something like this. Anyway, I even tried to sort things out for myself to understand it all for the next few weeks, since Hannah and my parents had basically shut me out completely and I had no way to reach them. I couldn't talk to Pete either, because he blocked me too, which didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't find him either, because both Hannah and Pete had left the house they used to live in and had gone to live with their own parents instead, so I had no way to contact anyone involved, which is why I resorted to my last option to get to the truth, Emily. Like I said, Emily and I were not really close, but I had to do what I had to do, so I just asked her to meet me one day and explain the situation to her. I asked her if what Hannah had said about the affair was true, and she denied it strongly, and I believed her, to be honest. Emily told me that she had only met Pete a few times and only in a professional way, so there was nothing between them, and she had no clue why Hannah would say something so terrible about her. She even told me that she had a stable boyfriend for a couple of years already and was planning to get married in a few months too. She even showed me pictures, and what she told me was more believable than whatever Hannah had said. I had no evidence, but I just felt somehow that Hannah had been lying about the real reason for the divorce. But since I had no evidence, I couldn't go back to my family, and I definitely couldn't go back without it. Back then, I was very desperate to go back to living with my family, since I really missed them, despite what they had done to me. With time, however, I was able to overcome it and move on with my life. I found a place and made my job the focus of my life so that I would have something to distract myself with, and I also had to pay the bills, so it was a better way of coping than just sitting around and being sad, since I had no other choice either. I was in a lot of pain, but I knew I had to continue somehow, with or without my family's support. Years passed, and now I'm doing much better in life. I've moved from my small apartment to a much bigger one, and even got engaged to my girlfriend of 2 years around a week ago. And our engagement post is what changed everything for me, because just a few days after that post, I received an email out of the blue that not only explained the whole story of Hannah's divorce to me and gave me all the answers I needed, but also had proof attached. My fiancée Liza, 30F, usually only posted us on Instagram, but the picture from our engagement made it to her Facebook feed as well, where she had a larger audience. It was a public post as well, and a lot of people saw it, including my ex-brother-in-law Pete. He happened to be someone my fiancée had met at a seminar a few years back, since she was a doctor, and ended up adding him on Facebook, which is how he found me. It really is a small world, and for the first time, I was happy about it. He reached out to me a few days after we posted, but instead of texting me on social media, he decided to send me an anonymous email. He explained later on that he did this just so that he wouldn't feel weird about what he was doing, since it had been several years since his divorce, and he didn't want to seem like a bitter loser who still hadn't managed to move on from what happened. Besides, he had been the one to block me in the first place, so he felt awkward and self-conscious about getting back in touch with me about something that happened so many years back. Coming to the contents of the email, I got it, had the whole story and proof of what had happened 7 years ago, and I was shocked when I saw it. So it turned out that my sister had been the one cheating on Pete, and not the other way around, like she'd been telling us for so long. Not only was that a big lie, but even more surprising was the fact that she'd been cheating on Pete with a friend of mine, just like she'd accused him. My friend Frank, 28M, was a cashier at the grocery store near Hannah's house back then, and I never would have guessed it myself, since I'd never seen them together. I suppose they'd hidden it well, but not well enough for Pete to not discover it, and when Hannah was caught, she told Pete that it was all my fault, because I'd been the one to introduce her to Frank, and had even told her about how he needed her help, since he was a hopeful singer, and she was a pretty good singer herself. She'd agreed to help him, and boom, they'd fallen in love before they knew it. She even said that I was part of it, and had helped them keep things secret for so long. Obviously, all of this was a total lie, and I hadn't even known that Frank and Hannah had something going on. He was furious when he found out and ended up blocking my whole family, which he admits now was kind of dumb on his part, but he was so mad that he hadn't thought much about his actions. Of course, he told me all of that in person, since the email itself was meant to be as detached as possible, as he didn't want it to be linked to him, but I did figure it out. The proof that he'd attached were a bunch of screenshots of emails between my sister and Frank, where they were talking about how easy it was to trick Pete, and were full of declarations of love and plans for where they were going to meet next. There was no way she could refute any of this, because she'd even signed off in the emails with her middle name, which not many people know of. I had her caught red-handed. I figured out that it must have been Pete who'd sent me this email after I searched through Liza's Facebook friends, because my intuition told me that this definitely had something to do with social media, and when I was finally able to find Pete in her list, I contacted him. We decided to meet a few days ago, and he told me that he'd learned about what Hannah had told her family from Emily, who'd met him a couple of years back. I told her to keep my side of the story a secret, and I was regretting it when I realized that if I hadn't said that, she probably would have told Pete about it, and I would have been able to prove my innocence ages ago. Anyway, they'd bumped into each other a couple of years ago, and she'd ended up asking him about the divorce, so they got to talking, and finally, he'd also learned what Hannah had told us. He admitted that he wanted to talk to me about it and tell me the truth, but didn't, because he felt weird. I swear, if Pete wasn't so easily embarrassed, my life would have been a lot easier to deal with. I did forgive him though, since I needed his help to completely ruin my sister, and I knew he'd be on board with it as well. Hannah had definitely been lying to my parents, so she'd have financial support during her divorce, and had even thrown me under the bus for good measure, because she'd known that one conversation with Emily and I'd know the truth. I couldn't comprehend the fact that someone, especially someone who was related to me by blood, could be this selfish. I'm sure she'd never bothered to correct the record either, and my parents had just swallowed whatever lies she'd been feeding them during her divorce. She'd known that if the truth about her being the cheater had been exposed to our parents, she would have been in big trouble, and she just couldn't risk that. Well, too bad, but it was finally out now, and I was going to use it to wreck her life, just like she'd wrecked mine all those years ago. I didn't know if my family lived in the same house, since I hadn't seen them for 7 years, but luckily, they hadn't moved. I checked with an old neighbor of mine before showing up, and was happy to find out that Hannah was still living with them as well. That wasn't very shocking to me, because Hannah always had been a lazy bum and hated doing any work herself, so if she had the chance of living with her elderly parents and making them do all the chores for her, she'd definitely do it. Anyway, 2 days back, Pete and I just showed up without notice at their house. My mom opened the door and we barely gave her any time to process what was happening before we walked in. My dad and Hannah were also there in the living room, and we were one happy family again, but not for long, since their expression turned sour just as soon as we entered. My dad started to threaten us right away and said that he'd call the cops if we didn't get the hell out of his house, and I fired back, saying that he was free to do whatever he wanted to, but only after he'd read the documents that we were about to show them. My parents looked very confused, but Hannah looked like she was going to puke and excused herself so that she could go to her room. I thought she was trying to run away, but there was no point in doing so anyway. Pete went on to show the divorce documents and the screenshots of Hannah and Frank's emails, while I explained the real story. Pete also told my parents how Hannah had to give up our family heirloom, my grandmother's diamond ring, in the settlement, because she couldn't afford to pay him the money, since she's a high school teacher, so she had to sell the ring instead. My parents were already appalled by what we told them, and that was just the icing on the cake. We watched the drama unfold as my dad demanded an explanation from Hannah for all that had happened, and when she still tried to lie and hide the truth, despite all the evidence against her, my dad kicked her out. He packed her stuff for her and handed over the bags to her, then told us all to get the hell out of their house. I didn't need to be told twice and left with Pete, while my sister begged and pleaded with my parents to let her back in, just like I had all those years ago. This was karma at its finest, and I couldn't be happier about it. It's been a couple of days since then, and my sister showed up at my place a few hours ago, demanding that I make things right with my parents right away. I didn't even know how she found me, but I told her that I didn't owe her anything anymore. She'd ruined my life once, so I paid her back, and we were now even. I guess she really had no dignity left, because as soon as I said that, she started sobbing and accusing me of being a monster. I didn't care much for her drama though, and shut the door while she continued to sob non-stop. I just put my headphones on and listened to music, while Lisa, my fiance, worked in her study, so neither of us would be bothered. After a while, Hannah finally left us alone, but she left a message with a marker on my door to remind me that I was nothing but a vengeful monster. I don't see anything wrong with what I did, very frankly, and don't feel sorry in the least, but Hannah seems pretty convinced that I'm the villain here somehow. I just did to her what she'd done to me several years ago, except that I told the truth, while she did nothing except lie and throw me under the bus. So what do you guys think? Ida for wrecking my sister's life and getting her kicked out 7 years after she accused me of causing her divorce? Update 1. So Hannah has still been pestering me, even though a week has gone by since she got kicked out. I had to scare her with the threat of cops when she called me for the 14th time today, and only then did she stop. I don't even know how she managed to find my phone number and address, but I'm least bothered by that right now. Hannah's trying to make me feel sorry for her, because I guess a school teacher's salary isn't enough for her to live on, but I don't think that's true, and she's just annoyed that she has to look for a place and pay for her own rent, electricity, and groceries now that our parents have kicked her out. So I don't feel too sorry for her, and in case you guys were wondering, yes, I did block her number several times, but I guess she's making her friends add me to conference call, so there's no point. As for my parents, they're just as bad, if not worse, than Hannah. They found me on Facebook and saw the post about my engagement as well, so now they want to be part of my life again, and even expressed their wish to attend my wedding. They haven't apologized yet, but for some reason, they expect me to just invite them to my wedding, which is supposed to be a very important day for me. I don't understand where these people find the nerve to say crap like this, but at least I'm not responding to any of it. Liza and I have had a blast reading their texts because there's really just no way they're serious right now. It's all just really pathetic for them. Update 2. Hannah came to my house again after I warned her to stop harassing me yesterday. I was about to go to work, but she stopped me by lying on the hood of my car and refused to move until I spoke to her. It was very annoying, and I ended up calling the police this time. They took her away while she shouted and cried and tried her best to make me look like the bad guy here, but sadly, Nobody was falling for her sad girl act here. It took some time to file charges against her, but as soon as I did it, I went to work because I didn't want to let this little incident spoil my day. I was sure my parents would bail her out anyway, since she was their favorite, and I was right as well. My parents, after bailing her out, sent me a long text about how I was being way too hard on them for an honest mistake that they'd made almost a decade ago. It was funny because nothing about what my sister and parents had done to me was either honest or even a mistake. They knew what they were doing and were fully aware of how mean they were, but that didn't stop them from throwing me out on the street, even though they knew that I had nowhere else to go. So now that I can do the same to them, I don't see a reason to be nice and merciful. I texted my parents back, saying that they'd lost any right to tell me what I could and couldn't do years ago, so they'd better stop fooling themselves. I haven't blocked them yet, since I haven't had the time to check my messages, but I will soon. Hopefully, then I'll be free of this whole family for good. Update 3. I just got home from work and checked my socials, only to see that my parents had sent me another long message. Liza and I read it together, and I swear, this was the funniest thing I've ever read. I guess the poor folks don't even realize that I'm not even hurt by anything they say or do now. I'm just laughing at how delusional and pathetic they are. Apparently, they still think that we're family, and told me that they've taken Hannah back in with them, and have decided that both their kids deserve a second chance, as if I'd ever done anything wrong. So while they'd taken my sister back in, they also expected me and Liza to come to their house sometime soon for dinner, and so we could sort out our differences in a civilized manner before the wedding. Bold of them to assume that I'd even want them at my wedding at all. We had a good laugh about their stupid message, and after that, I wrote right back, saying that I wasn't interested at all in anything that they'd invited us to and was just fine living away from them. Like I had for these past 7 years, they'd shown me that I was better off without them, and I was always going to be grateful for that. I didn't need them at all anymore, and neither did I want their so-called forgiveness, so they could peacefully continue to play happy family with my sister, like they had been so far. With that last text, I blocked them once and for all, because I didn't even want the laughs anymore. I was done, and I was out. I'm sure they'll try to get back in touch with me one way or another soon, but too bad for them, I'm not having it anymore. Liza is the only family I need now, and I'm happy with just her. My parents and my sister have sadly never been able to look beyond themselves, and I highly doubt that they ever will. So the next time they get in touch with me, they'll be speaking to my lawyer as well, and that's a promise.